I'd like to take this opportunity today to just sort of broaden out the conversation around data by asking what kinds of data we're referring to, and also if we're collecting and using the right data. So I'm a qualitative social researcher from Monash University, formerly RMIT. I'm in the process of transitioning, hence the RMIT slides. Apologies for that. Still getting my head around the rebranding. And what I specialise in, and my colleagues specialise in, is sort of going into people's homes and asking them questions about how they live and how their lives are changing in relation to energy demand. We do things like interviews, in-home tours and observations, things that I'm today calling small data. And we really collect people's voices and stories through that. And so my presentation today is really about advocating for the benefits and usefulness of this small data in revealing really important and critical insights about how we can design better demand response programs, how we can better engage consumers, how we can build policies to better support consumers in this changing market. So just to kind of clarify the, oh, that didn't work. There we go. Clarify the difference between what I'm referring to in terms of big data and small data. At the moment, there's a very strong industry focus on big data. I think that's mostly what we've been talking about at this conference today. And that really involves sort of large-scale data sets, quantitative analyses and large-scale surveys, which generally involve quite specific, they have to involve quite specific and closed questions and statistical analysis. And this data is currently being used to understand consumers in a much more nuanced way, as we heard this morning in regards to the NEAR project, and also to give that data back to consumers to help them make better choices and decisions. But I would argue that small data is actually quite underplayed and underutilised in this changing context. It's small in the sense that it generally involves small numbers, but it's also small in the sense, I would say, in that it's often unfairly dismissed as being people's stories, their subjective experiences, soft or non-representative data, or considered too variable or individualised to do anything in particularly useful with. But it's big in the sense of the richness, the complexity and the diversity that can be revealed when we talk to people about their lives and understand what's going on for them. And in contrast, big quantitative data is often held up as being rigorous, as factual, and as hard data that we can rely on. But I would also suggest that there's something fictional about the quality of big data that we've come to rely on as well. And one of the risks with big data, I think, that we're seeing now in the industry is that we have a vision for a consumer that often looks something like this. This is actually a provocative persona that I developed back in 2013 and published as part of a book project I wrote back then. But it was really sort of draw attention to some of the inherent assumptions that are circulating, not only in the Australian energy industry, but this was actually an international project, about the type of ideal consumer that we're working towards in this new landscape of digital technologies and increasing data. And the assumptions, really present in this character, this resource man ideal, is that we have this consumer that's going to be interested and able to manage their energy consumption on a micro scale. They're going to be rational, functional, efficient, tech savvy, much like the engineers and the economists, which currently dominate in the industry at the moment. And he is gendered because these ideas of being interested in data and technology are also consistent with masculine pursuits. And we find when we go into homes that it is men who are in fact more likely to be interested in using data and technology in this way. And there's an assumption there too that this person's going to act autonomously in the home, which of course we all know is not what actually goes on. But this is certainly, I think, a risk of relying too heavily, because what happens with big data is we ask questions that essentially perpetuate this character and assume that people want data and technology, and the questions are just about how we go about giving it to them in the most efficient and the best way. But of course, and there are resource men out there, I would probably suggest there are a number of them in this room as well, and we do see him in our research, we come across him regularly, and of course of resource women as well. But his efforts to conserve energy are often thwarted by other members of the household, particularly partners, children and pets, as I'm sure everybody here can empathise with. And many people just simply don't identify with this resource man concept or ideal at all. So we need a different hero or a different heroine or a different set of personas for the energy sector as we move forward. And I think that small data can help, in particular in revealing some of the emerging trends that are happening in households and the complexity and diversity that is going on. For example, in thinking about how vulnerable households experience energy hardship and energy poverty and what that actually looks like, how that affects their lives beyond the energy bill, like their whole lives, or why households are disengaging with the energy sector and becoming distrustful of our market. But I wanted to just draw your attention to a couple of trends that I think this type of small data that can reveal that will probably be quite familiar to all of you. The first is around changing trends in pet care, and this is something that's emerged, again, just by going into people's homes and observing the fact that there might be a window open for a pet or a dog, or that the pets become part of the conversation. And what we're starting to see in Australian households is a trend towards air conditioning and heating homes for pets when the humans aren't at home. And this is a trend that's consistent with what's happening internationally through what's called the humanisation of pets and also the premiumisation of animals around the world. And it's a particularly big issue for Australia because we have one of the highest rates of pet ownership of any country in the world, and we also have a very large number of cats and dogs at home during the day. So you can imagine if everyone's leaving their air conditioning on in the future for their cat or their dog, that could actually change the demand profile of the energy sector and therefore the types of things that we might need to be thinking about. Likewise, when we ask people about their energy bills and how they might reduce it, another issue that comes up is needing to use or have been confused about whether to use the heater or the air conditioner for a young child or a baby. And we found that there's very inconsistent health advice about this available. We did a review of that a number of years ago of government and public health websites and found that there was in fact no consistent advice for parents of young children about what they need to be how they need to be air conditioning and or heating or just keeping their young children comfortable when they first come into their homes. So I would suggest that these types of trends actually change the conversation about the kind of data we might need to be providing households with. In the instances, or just the brief examples I've given you here, what we actually might need to be giving households in order for them to make different decisions about energy is advice on how they can keep their pets or their children or their babies comfortable and healthy in hot weather or cold weather. And that actually becomes a different set of data tools and different set of data solutions that we might not necessarily be considering at the moment in this energy conversation. Now, some of those already exist. Obviously, the veterinary sector and the health sector have sources of advice, but the conversations between the data that the energy sector is looking to provide and those other sectors hasn't sort of quite come together yet, I would argue. And finally, that also kind of leads to different possible ideas around what demand management programs, technologies and policies might look like in this sector. So one of the things that we've been suggesting for some time now is potentially looking at smart technologies for pets that could allow them to access hot and cool spaces around the property, therefore alleviating maybe some of the need to leave an air conditioner or a heater on for a dog or a cat, or providing monitoring technology so you can check on your dog and your cat or even your baby, obviously, which we already do at home, rather than heating or cooling out of anxiety. And the last example there is from a study that we did a number of years ago with the Consumer Advocacy Panel on families' energy consumption. And that study really found that one of the things was asking people what they did during really hot weather to sort of stay cool and keep sane essentially during heat waves. And one of the things they do is that families regularly leave homes and they go to the beach, they go to the pool, they go to the library, they go to the cinema. And so one of our ideas there was, well, how do we incentivise those activities to get people out of the home during those really hot periods to also achieve a demand response benefit? So I would argue in conclusion that small data can really kind of help us think outside the box and think outside the square of what types of data we might need, and also then inform the types of survey questions and the big data that we might be asking and collecting as well. So it's a complementary approach rather than an either or situation. Thank you.